Thank you for inviting me. I'm all wired up. I feel like one of my experimental animals here. I mean, I've never figured. Thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. Many thanks to the Lowell Institute for supporting my travel here, and many thanks to the New England Aquarium. It's funny, I remember as a child, a little kid, driving up from southern Connecticut and going to the New England Aquarium, the Boston Aquarium, and seeing the sharks and saying, oh boy, isn't that so cool, and going to all the tanks, and of course my love of coral reef fishes and coral reefs. I never thought that one day I'd actually be speaking to an audience in a New England Aquarium venue, but so it's very exciting for me. It's very exciting. It's great to be here. As John indicated, I'm going to speak primarily about sharks tonight, even though I've done a number of different projects on other pelagic fishes like tunas. But tonight's a shark night, and what I'm going to do is walk through a number of shark species. Now, most people, when they go to New England or they're in Massachusetts, don't really think about sharks. Maybe in the summertime the media likes to exploit sharks a little bit, but it's not really thought of as a sharky place. But we do have a number of species that do migrate here, and some of the largest members of these species have been caught right off our shores. So I'm going to walk through the various kinds of sharks that occur here, go through the diversity that we see right here in New England. All of them are summer migrants. They're seasonal visitors. You know, I'm not going to take you offshore tomorrow and say we're going to catch a shark, because we're likely not to. The waters are still a little bit too cold. Many of these species don't show up until June. They stick around until September, October, sometimes early November, and then they're gone again. They move offshore as temperatures cool down. So we're going to talk about their biology, talk about their ecology, try to give you some indication of the kinds of research we're doing and how we go about studying sharks. And in the last 15 years, we've seen changes in technology that have allowed us to do different kinds of things that no one ever dreamed of. At least even Jacques Cousteau didn't dream of it, and I didn't as a kid, and I didn't think it was possible 10 years ago. And that involves satellite telemetry, and I'm going to touch on those things as well. I'll walk through the shark species, talk about these things, and I'll stick around a little while and we can answer some questions, and I'll stick around afterward as well if you guys want to really get into anything in particular. I work for the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. I'm a fisheries biologist, and the program that I head up has been aptly named the Shark Research Program, Massachusetts. There's a number of different things that we do in the program, and one of the funny things that I like to say at the beginning of the talk is I'm going to use the word we a lot, but my funding level is not really all that high, so the we is usually me. And a number of volunteers, and some of which I actually get from lectures like this that come down to work with me on various projects. My lab is on Martha's Vineyard Island. A lot of my research is conducted out of the vineyard, but also out of Nantucket, on the Cape, and I've had the opportunity to travel to other parts of the state as well. Bearing in mind, of course, that the species that I work on do not stop at state or national borders. I've had to travel, and I've been very, very fortunate to travel to places to study some of these animals as they move to different areas. My work largely involves field research, which includes sampling at tournaments, some coastal surveys, which I'll talk about briefly, some physiology work, which I'm not really going to touch on all that much, but has become a major component of the research we're doing, and ecology and life history. And of course, I work for a fisheries agency, so it puts me in a great position to conduct cooperative research with a number of other scientists. And those scientists not only occur here in Massachusetts at various universities, but at other research centers, other academic institutions throughout the United States. And I've even been fortunate to collaborate with people in other parts of the world. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that in the end of my talk. Of course, working for a fisheries research agency, we're very, very concerned with management of populations of fish. So whether it be haddock, codfish, or sharks, we're very concerned with our ultimate goal is maintaining populations of these animals at sustainable levels so that we can exploit them at a sustainable level, at the same time maintaining a healthy ecosystem. So management is a key objective of the shark research program as well, and that's why you heard from John that I cooperate and work on various management committees along the east coast of the United States. Final component, but really not the least important, is education. I like to get out, do lectures like this, and I speak at schools, and I lecture at universities, and I travel to conferences, and I come to these kind of fora in order to talk to the general public and other scientists about the research we're conducting and about sharks in general. All too often, sharks are malaligned because they are considered to be dangerous. They're considered to be something that is likely to attack someone, and that's really not the case. In Massachusetts, we do not have frequent shark attack. As a matter of fact, shark attack doesn't occur frequently really anywhere. And there are certain situations that the swimmer can avoid so that to minimize the probability of shark attack. But if someone, and I get dozens of calls every summer from whether it be a lifeguard or a woman who's bringing her children to the beach, wondering whether they're going to have to deal with shark attack. And I try to stress to them the fact that it's just something that is not likely to occur. So what you're not going to see me talk about too much tonight is shark attack at all. What I've done in order to go through these species in a meaningful sense is divide them into two general groups. Those sharks which you're most likely to encounter close to shore. So if you're a surf fisherman or you're less likely but a swimmer and you see a shark, these next few species are the ones that occur in our coastal areas. Okay? And then what we're going to do after we get into these near-shore coastal species, we'll get away from the shore. We'll go out several miles and we'll look at the larger pelagic oceanic sharks. Sharks that get much, much bigger. Sharks that are typically caught by fishermen. Some sharks are marketed, others are not. Most are released. So we'll talk about the pelagic sharks after I go into the coastal species. This is the east coast of Martha's Vineyard Island. It is actually Chappaquiddick Island. Chappaquiddick has got a very, very large barrier beach with some coastal salt ponds, which you see here. And most of this is preserved habitat. And it's an ideal place for me to conduct some of my field surveys to determine what species of sharks occur close to land in Massachusetts. So for the last 17 years, I've been going to this area and setting longline gear to sample those sharks that occur. Longline gear is really, as it sounds, just a very long line with lots of smaller lines coming off of it called ganchions or drop lines. And each drop line is baited and set into the water. So my average long line is about a half a mile long. It has about 50 hooks on it. And I set generally in the evening and haul back first thing in the morning. And what it does is it gives me an opportunity to determine what shark species are occurring there. Here you can see a small sandbar shark. From doing this longline survey in this area and in other areas of Massachusetts, I've determined that there are 3 or 4 primary species that occur close to beaches, that occur close to our coastlines, that occur in our estuaries and bays. Most of these are known by the general public under the generic term of sand shark. And your average surf fisherman will tell me, I caught a sand shark today. And it really is quite a generic term. Both these are sand sharks. And I'm going to show you another sand shark after that. But actually they're not. They're very, very distinct, different species, and some get larger than others. This is a sandbar shark, locally known in Massachusetts also as a brown shark. You can see why we've gone over to using Latin names for a lot of species, because if I go to Europe and tell them I'm studying a sand shark, they're going to, or sandbar shark, they're going to say, what is that? So we go Carcharinus plumbeus. This is a dogfish, and it's called the smooth dogfish, Mustellus canis. It's a very, very common species of shark. Turns out the Mustellus canis, the smooth dogfish, gets about 4 feet long, so we're looking at an adult here. It's about as big as they get. The sandbar shark, we're not looking at an adult. This is a shark that gets about 8.5 feet long and 250 pounds. This is a foot long here in the scale, so you can get an idea of how big that animal is. This is the average size of sandbar sharks that are caught south of Cape Cod. Both species do not go north of the Cape. So if a fisherman calls me and says, I caught a sandbar shark and he's fishing out of Gloucester, it's not going to happen. That species just simply does not occur up there. So we're at the northern limit to the range of these two particular shark species, and it's a particularly important area to study them, because if populations begin to contract or shrink, typically what happens is numbers will begin to decline at the northern and southern ends of the ranges of those species. So Massachusetts is an important area to look at the ecology and abundance of these two sharks. A lot of times when we catch these sharks is we tag and release them. And I'm going to touch on tagging a few times in this talk, because tagging is a very, very useful tool that's been used over the last 40 years to study populations of sharks and other species of fish too. I'm talking tunas, billfish, red drum, codfish. Tagging is a very useful tool. If you watch the Discovery Channel, you'll see tagging occurring all the time in a variety of animals, whether it be a radio collar on a wolf or a tag into the muscle of a shark. All of our sharks, for the most part, are released with tags. And when you tag a shark, you record information on where you caught it, how big the shark was, male or female, and what species, obviously. That was an adult female smooth dogfish. It turns out from looking at smooth dogfish populations in Massachusetts, we're also catching these very, 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 very small ones. These are neonates or newborns. We typically refer to newborn sharks as pups. Not because they're dog-like, but just it's a term that's carried on over the years to refer to baby sharks. And this is the way most shark species look when they are born. Tiny little replicas of mom and dad. They have a remarkable reproductive capability in that males and females actually mate. The young grow within the female for a period of anywhere from 9 months to a couple of years. Then the female will give birth to live young that are tiny little replicas of her. One of the problems with this particular strategy when it comes to sharks is sharks typically have low numbers of young, and they only reproduce every couple of years, which means that they don't replace themselves very fast. So if you take too many sharks, you may take more than is typically replaced by the population. So we see shark stocks or populations of sharks decline very, very rapidly when they're exploited by fisheries or they interact with fisheries. So sharks in general are very, very sensitive species to overexploitation. It turns out that the smooth dogfish gives birth to its young in the spring and early summer, then these in bays and estuaries south of Cape Cod. So if you set small gill nets, you're likely to catch these baby smooth dogfish. They stay in Massachusetts waters till late summer, and they bug out when things cool down. The sandbar shark, on the other hand, they all seem to be immature animals. We have not caught any adults close to land. So what that tells me is, after looking at over 100 sandbar shark specimens, measuring them, even doing some dissections, doing some tagging here, using a different kind of shark tag on the sandbar shark, pretty much looks like these younger sandbar sharks are migrating into Massachusetts waters, using them as secondary nursery habitat and getting away from larger predatory oceanic sharks, which you're going to see shortly, which get much bigger, which are likely to feed on these sandbar sharks. Now these sandbars have a beautiful jaw and a full complement of teeth, and they occur in very, very popular swimming areas. Most people don't see them. They're likely to be there, and they have no desire whatsoever to feed on people. So there's no shark attack that occurs from sandbar sharks. One problem we're having with sandbar shark populations is that they are highly valued not only for their meat, but primarily for their fins. Sandbar shark has a fin that's considered to be highly marketable and very palatable. These fins are shipped to Asian markets where they are used to make shark fin soup. As a matter of fact, the 3 fins off a sandbar shark are much more valuable than the rest of the meat. And this fin probably right here is worth $15. The part of the fin that's used by the Asian market is these tiny little supportive elements here that look like dried spaghetti. And you can come up later and look at this. It's the skin and the meat is stripped off the fins. The shark fin soup is made from those elements, and it's a very, very expensive commodity. And I believe recently I heard that a bowl of shark fin soup in Hong Kong goes for about $100 US. So it's a very, very expensive commodity. And most fishermen will catch sharks, keep their fins, and in the United States they're required to also keep the meat. Unfortunately, most other countries that exploit shark populations are not required by law to keep the meat. So a practice that has been going on for many, many, many years is referred to as finning, where a fishing vessel will catch a shark, cut its fins off, and discard the rest of the shark alive. Now, fins don't grow back, and the shark will typically drown or starve to death. They can't swim too well without fins, and the fins are then marketed. It's a real problem worldwide, and it's one that is very difficult to solve because it's an international problem, and that's where most of our issues now with shark populations are occurring. It's an international problem. Turns out the sandbar shark doesn't mature until it's at least 15 years old. Sandbar shark also grows on the order of just a few inches a year, gives birth to less than 20 young every 2 years. So we've got some serious problems relative to exploitation. It looks like sandbar shark populations at this time are extremely depressed off the coast of the U.S. One of the things you do after you accumulate data over time is you plot it out and start to see what kind of pictures emerge. So these are some of the areas where I've caught sandbar sharks. As you can see, it's all south of Cape Cod. And I plotted this a couple of years ago. We have other specimens as well, mostly from Nantucket Sound. And this is referred to as a length-frequency distribution. And I don't really want you to spend too much time looking at that. But really what it means is that almost all the sharks that we've caught are between 3 feet and 5 feet in length. And what that tells me, knowing very well that at about 5.5 feet these animals mature, is that they're all, males and females, are all immature. So this then points to the fact that Massachusetts is an important secondary nursery habitat for the species. Sand tiger. Now, I don't know if the aquarium currently has any sand tigers because I haven't been in there in a year or so. Typically, the aquarium does house them because sand tigers are phenomenal species for display purposes. They're hardy, they're rugged, they look really mean, and that's really what you want sharks to look like. This is the jaw of a sand tiger shark. Right here, you can see that this particular sand tiger has a similar kind of jaw. Very, very gnarly, very mean, toothy looking. It's a completely harmless species of shark, but it does draw a lot of attention. And it thrives in captivity. Most of the other sharks I'm going to show you today do not do well in captivity. That's why you're not going to see hammerheads, blue sharks, Makos, white sharks. You're not going to see them at the average aquarium because they die. They're difficult to transport, and they typically don't live in environments that have walls. But this shark can handle it. So if you went across the street to New England Aquarium, you're very likely to see a sand tiger. Sand tigers occur in Massachusetts, like the other sharks, from June through September. And they get to be well over 10 feet long and 500 pounds. It turns out that most of the sand tigers, and I've only looked at 9 that were ever caught by fishermen or reported to my program over the last 17 years. So they're not highly abundant. One of them was emailed to me in a photograph by a diver up off Gloucester. This is a species that doesn't mind going north of Cape Cod, tolerates cooler water, but most of them, if not all of them, were less than 4 or 5 feet long. So these were all very, very small sand tigers, even though, again, sand tigers get very large. Most of your big sand tiger sharks occur off Chesapeake, off North Carolina, and there's some great dive operations actually down there where you can go see sand tigers. They're fascinating animals, and if you get a chance, I suggest you go look at the ones at New England Aquarium, assuming the aquarium has some. Do you guys know? They have 2. Yeah, they're beautiful to look at. What's fascinating about the sand tiger is it only gives birth to 2 young, and that's because those 2 young that actually survive for the 12-month gestation period survived because they ate all their brothers and sisters. So it's a really, really fascinating life history, interesting strategy. So in the paired uteri of the female, you've got a whole bunch of brothers and sisters in there, and then it's the ultimate survival of the fittest, where the only 2 survivors are born, one from each uterus. And what's also fascinating about the sand tiger shark is that in order to maintain neutral buoyancy, it goes to the surface and gulps air. Swallows air and puts air into its stomach so that it has a little bit of a buoyancy compensator to keep it from sinking. Therefore, it doesn't have to swim as fast. So it's an energetic, a means by which to save energy. And so it's really fascinating. We don't know other sharks that do this. but the sand tiger is capable of it. So it's a really interesting species, and we don't know a tremendous amount of information about the other life history aspects, how long they live, how fast they grow, those kind of things. Really important to know if you want to manage the population. Now we're going to see, that's it for sand sharks, those three primary species. There's another shark called the spiny dogfish, very abundant throughout Massachusetts. It's the only shark that's actually marketed. It's caught by commercial fishermen, sent overseas and marketed to fish and chips outfits. It's actually consumed by Europeans. I don't touch too much on spiny dogfish. It's a complex subject because it is a heavily marketed fish. It is a very long-lived animal. Even though it only gets about this big, it's thought to live well over 50 years. One estimate puts it at 80 years old, so it's a very slow-growing, long-lived shark. If we get away from the coastline and we want to go look at the other species of sharks, now I separate them into these two general groups, but there's nothing to say that there aren't exceptions to the rule. For example, the white shark may come close to shore. The basking shark may come close to shore. I've seen blue sharks close to shore. Very, very, very unusual. Typically, if I'm going to go find blue sharks, I'm going to pile into my boat, and I'm going to get up at 4 in the morning, and we're going to go out 3 hours, 4 hours. And then we're going to start chumming, and we're going to attract the sharks to the boat, and then we can do what we need to do with them, whether it be just swim with them or study them. The primary areas off Massachusetts where I get a lot of my information on sharks are here in blue, numbered 1 and 2. A lot of my information actually comes from shark tournaments. Shark tournament is really just a fishing contest. Whoever goes out and catches the biggest shark wins. I've been working with shark tournaments for 20 years, not only in this job, but in my previous job. And one of the things we try to do as a biologist working with tournaments is you try to get them to fish in a conservation-minded manner so that they're not piling the dock with 1,000 dead sharks, which used to occur, particularly after the movie Jaws came out. The only good shark back then was a dead one. Now we have very, very, very conservation-oriented fishing tournaments, particularly in Massachusetts, where the minimum size for blue sharks is 300 pounds. If you don't catch a 300-pound shark, you can't bring it in. By far the most abundant large pelagic shark, oceanic shark, probably in the world, is the blue shark. I did a lot of research on the blue shark. My master's degree was on the growth rate and longevity of this shark. I'm interested in the physiology and other basic life history. I've done acoustic telemetry, which we'll talk about. The blue shark is very abundant. If we got in my boat, and we're likely to need a bigger boat to get everybody in it, but let's say we all packed onto my boat, and we got up at 4 in the morning, we went out 20 miles, and we started setting a chum slick, there's a pretty good chance within about 2 to 4 hours we're going to see blue sharks. Then I'm going to throw your scuba tanks on you, we're going to jump in the water, and we're going to swim with them. Because they're a pretty docile animal. They're not known to be particularly aggressive. If you swim up behind one and grab it by the tail, it's likely to bite you. But what isn't? I mean, I did that to my dog growing up. I got bit. So I don't do it to sharks. Couple features of the anatomy of the blue shark, as is typical of other sharks. Blue sharks have what's called a nictitating membrane, which is like an upside-down eyelid. So when a blue shark gets really close to what it wants to eat, it closes its eyes to protect them. And you can see this blue shark. I was teasing it actually with a piece of tuna fish tied to a line. And he grabbed it, and of course when it grabbed it, these sharks have these beautiful protrusible jaws. And you've all seen that wonderful footage of a white shark eating a piece of horse meat off of Australia in slow motion. And you can see the way those jaws literally come out of the head of the shark. They are supported strictly by musculature, as opposed to our upper jaws attached to our skull. Not in the case of sharks. So here you can see that protrusible jaw. The shark is protecting its eye, and it's relying on electrosensory perception in order to find the prey once it gets within, say, 3 to 4 feet. And those electrosensory organs are all over the nose of the shark. And of course you can see the nostrils of this particular animal. Sharks have 2 nostrils, only they don't breathe through them like we do. Their nostrils are kind of go into olfactory bulbs, and there's no connection between the olfactory system and the gills. Sharks are breathing by taking water in their mouth and passing them over their 5 gills. So that's the way they respire, and you can see the gill slits here. Typically sharks have 5, but some species have 6, and one species has 7. This was, up until 2001, the largest blue shark ever recorded, measured by a fisherman. It was 454 pounds and just short of 13 feet long. So this was a world record shark, which means that though the organization called the International Game Fish Association, which maintains world records, kind of like the Guinness Book of Fishing, maintains world records throughout the world, they listed this as the largest blue shark ever caught. And this was caught right off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, again, 30 miles out. But we get, in New England in the summertime, some of the largest blue sharks on record. It's an area where blue sharks congregate. It's an area where they mate with other blue sharks. It's an area where they feed heavily because we have such high productive waters. Blue shark is also, because of its abundance, a well-studied shark, and it's been tagged a lot. And I've touched on tagging a little bit. This is a shark tag here, which you can look at later. Shark tag looks like this. It's got this little metal barb here that goes underneath the skin into the muscle of the shark. And virtually anybody can tag a shark if you take an interest in it. As a matter of fact, of the 200,000 sharks that have been tagged in the last 40 years, probably about 95% of them have been by people who just like to go fish and tag sharks. Maybe about 5% by biologists like myself. And well over 100,000 of those sharks have been blue sharks. So we've gotten a lot of information. And when you tag the shark, you put this little tag into it. At the end of this tag is a little tiny bottle. So you got this little message in a bottle, and on that message is a number particular to this card. So if I go out south of the vineyard and I catch this blue shark and I pop this tag into it, and I know it's tag number 12222, I fill out this card and say, okay, I tagged a blue shark south of Martha's Vineyard. It was a 6-foot male. It was, September 3rd, 2001. And I send that card in, and the people who maintain the tagging program in Rhode Island will key punch that into their computer, and they'll do this all summer for all the sharks that are ever caught and tagged. And that'll just sit there. Well, let's say that somebody in Portugal is out fishing, longlining for swordfish, and they catch that shark, and they see this little tag. Now, there's a chance they may not report it. And that happens a lot. Because if you report a tag, then people know where you're fishing. And fishermen don't like people to know where they're fishing, unfortunately. I can't say I blame them. I fish a lot myself. But sometimes they do report it. And if they don't speak English, it's okay. Because when they open up that little bottle, they're going to have a little message in there in 5 different languages. And they're going to speak Portuguese. And so's that little message, and it says, if you ever catch me, would you report it to the shark tagging program in Rhode Island? And here's the phone number you call. And you send in that information. So the person sitting at the computer punches that in, and that little tag number comes up, and you get a map that points out where that shark was tagged, 2001, and where it was recaptured in 2004. You got a migration rate. You got 2 distribution points. And if he says it's 5 feet long, and I say it's 4 feet long, you even got a growth rate. You do this to 100,000 sharks, and it turns out with the blue shark, you got a 4% recapture rate. So 4 out of every 100 that are tagged get recaptured. You start to get a really nice picture of what's going on out there. And this is the kind of picture you get. Now this slide's very old, probably about 5 or 6 years old. We've got a lot more recaptures since then. But most of the sharks you can see have been tagged off the east coast of the United States, because that's largely where most shark fishing occurs. But these are all the different spots around the North Atlantic Ocean that these sharks have been recaptured. So it turns out that the distribution of the blue shark doesn't just go north and south. It goes west to east and east to west. And if we just plotted males, we'd see what the males did. We'd plot females, we'd see what they do. We'd plot little sharks versus big sharks. We can start getting a really nice picture of what the biology of this species is through the tagging process. So this is just an example of the kind of information you get from the shark tagging program. And each species is different. Now, in the case of the blue shark, let's say I want to know what it does I certainly want to know what it does from year to year, but I want to know what it does from minute to minute. What does it do at 9 o'clock every morning? Tagging data doesn't show you that. And that's the other tool we use. That's where the other tool we use comes into play. That is the acoustic telemetry. It's called basically it's a radio tag. And I'm sure some of you have seen this done on polar bears or on TV or wolves, mostly terrestrial animals. We also do it with fish. And what you see here is a transmitter affixed to the back of this shark. And what this transmitter is going to do is tell me where that shark is. And I'm going to get in the boat, and I'm going to put a hydrophone in the water, and I'm going to wire that hydrophone to a receiver, and I'm going to put that receiver wired up to a laptop computer, and it's going to record information. And I'm going to get an idea of where that shark's going over the next 8 hours or 48 hours, and what it's doing in not only a vertical sense, not only in a horizontal sense, but in a vertical sense too, because I'm going to have a transmitter on that shark that's going to tell me the depth of it. So I can figure out where the shark spends its time and what it does from minute by minute. And this is just an example of what the blue shark does. This is, you got to imagine this being like a big aquarium and we release a fish in it. And this line here tells you where it is in the water column. This line down here is the bottom. This is all in meters. So roughly multiply each meter by 3 and you've got a sense of what feet is. So the shark, when I released it at about 9 o'clock in the morning, went down to about 120 feet. At this point, it was probably recovering from the fact that I had to handle that shark for about 5 or 6 minutes. I had to fight it on rod and reel. I exhausted the fish because I want to exhaust the fish because I don't want to handle a shark that's not exhausted because they typically will try to bite your head off if you do, if you just grab a shark that's not tired. So we've exhausted the fish, and he's probably recovering in this first hour from the exhaustive event. Then it goes into a pattern where it just goes up and down in the water column. So it tells us that this particular species doesn't swim in a straight line. It prefers to move vertically up and down through the water column, which makes perfect sense if you're trying to find something. And what's it trying to find? It's trying to find food, and it may be even trying to find a female, because this was a male shark. So it's very, very interesting behavior, and this kind of telemetry is how you learn about the basic behavior of these animals on a minute-by-minute basis. Another oceanic species is the Mako shark. Anybody in the room here ever eat Mako? Very good eating fish. I think it's better than swordfish. It has certainly been compared to swordfish. It's an excellent shark to consume. It does occur here in New England in the summertime, and this happens to be a very small specimen. I mean, I was snorkeling with this shark, and I'd love to be able to tell you it was 13 feet long and 3,000 pounds, but it wasn't. It was only about this big, and he was just zipping along at the surface. And I was trying to catch up to him so I can get a photo of him. When you take a Mako shark out of the water, this is what it looks like. This is about a 5-foot Mako. Mako is built very differently from the blue shark. Blue shark is a much more sluggish animal than a Mako. The Mako has short fins. It's got a tail that's almost the same size in terms of lobes, upper and lower lobe. It's got a caudal keel, which means it's flattened right here. Mako shark is a very streamlined animal because it's a fast fish. Makos could probably swim well over 30 miles an hour. And if you catch a Mako on rod and reel, well over half the time, that shark's going to swim 30 miles an hour, and when it hits the end of that line, it's going to soar straight up in the air, come right out of the water. And it's one of the most fantastic things to see, is Makos jumping when you're fighting them on rod and reel. And sometimes they'll jump without even being, I was motoring along, 30 miles offshore once, and I saw a Mako jump by the side of the boat, right back into the water, free jumping fish. So Makos are able to breach, and in order to do that, we know they have to be able to swim fast. And fast Makos, as fast as they are, they can feed on generally whatever they want, because Makos get big. Makos do get 12 feet long, just like the blue shark. But a 12-foot blue shark's 450 pounds, and a 12-foot Mako is 1,200 pounds. This is a baby Mako. What's interesting about Mako shark babies is this is an embryo. This is from a female that was caught by a commercial fisherman off of Puerto Rico a bunch of years ago. Turns out it was a pregnant female, and he noticed that and actually shipped it up to the laboratory that I was working at so we can examine it. because only on 3 or 4 occasions have we ever had a chance to see what a pregnant Mako and what baby Makos look like. And what they have are these large yolk sacs. So these tiny little replicas of mom and dad have these yolk sacs, and they feed off the yolk in these sacs, but they also feed on eggs that the mother continues to produce. And then after about 12 months, this yolk sac is fully absorbed, and these animals are ready to be born. And they're born about that big. Tiny little Makos zipping around. Now the big difference between shark reproduction and, say, mammalian reproduction, even though mammals give birth to live young, there's parental care, maternal care in mammals, not in sharks. Best thing a shark can do after it's born is just get away, because mom and dad, or mom, I should say, dad's nowhere to be found, is likely to want to snack you up, just snatch you right up and eat you. So it's possible. So they get away. There's no care, no love lost there. They just get out of the way. And they typically go to areas where they won't be feasted on by larger sharks, like these nursery areas I was talking about earlier. This is a 1,221-pound Mako shark. This is currently the world record. This was caught off of Martha's Vineyard Island about 2 years ago, now 3 years ago, by a fisherman during one of the tournaments. And this is a big female. What's fascinating about the Mako is females mature at about 500 pounds, which is a big fish. Males mature at about 200 pounds, which is a much smaller fish. So we get gross disparities between size at maturity between males and females in the Mako shark. This big female did not have anything in its stomach, but I have examined the stomachs of other large Mako sharks. And this is the kind of information we get from dissections where you cut an animal open and look at what it's been feeding on. And what's interesting about the Mako is all the little Makos love to feed on bluefish. They chase bluefish schools, they catch them, they eat them, they gobble them up. 80% of all the stomachs we've ever looked at for small Mako sharks are bluefish. When they get to be this big, with the speed that they have, and their nature allows them to penetrate cold waters, they feed on bigger things. In this particular case, a 960-pound Mako that I examined fed on a harbor porpoise. It bit it into 4 pieces, swallowed it. I reconstructed them for the photograph. So this is not how it looked in the stomach of the shark. But this was about a 40-pound harbor porpoise. Porpoises move fairly quickly, but it's no match for a Mako shark. And a big meal like this lasts a long time. It's been estimated that if a white shark fills its belly with whale meat, which they do, or with a seal, which they do, that meal may last upwards of a month to 2 months. So it behooves a shark, like a big Mako, to chase down one of these animals and feed on it. Eat a big steak instead of going out for a lot of little popcorn. And that's what these animals do. That's their strategy. So in looking at a number of big Mako stomachs, I see this shift in diet from fish to marine mammals. But the Mako is not does not bite people. It's not implicated in a lot of shark attacks. This is a Thresher shark. I'm going to go into a couple of species here that, believe it or not, we don't know a lot about them. And if anybody in the room ever wants to be a marine biologist that studies sharks, there's still a lot we need to know. I'm telling you tidbits of information we do have, maybe how we get that information, but nothing's known about the Thresher shark. It's named a Thresher because it's got this big, beautiful tail, upper lobe, that it uses like a whip. And I've actually seen a Thresher shark swatting bluefish so hard that they were coming out of the water. I said, bluefish don't jump. Well, these were being motivated. So fertile territory for research. Hammerhead sharks. There are 8 species of hammerheads throughout the world. The ones that occur off the east coast of the United States are primarily the great hammerhead and the scalloped hammerhead. This is the scalloped hammerhead shark. Rare visitors to New England. 17 years of studying shark tournament caught fish, not a single hammerhead caught, scalloped hammerhead caught. One great hammerhead caught about 100 miles out. So you got to get way out into offshore canyon areas, very, very warm waters, Gulf Stream waters, in order to catch the hammerheads. What's so fascinating, of course, about the hammerhead sharks is the hammer. And if you look at the hammer while it's still on the shark, you see that the eye is way out at the end of the hammer. You've also got the nose way out at the end of the hammer. And I took one of these hammerheads once on a research cruise, and I had a whole bunch of time to kill, and we had done a whole bunch of dissections. And I cut the head off it, and then I removed all the skin and the muscle and the nervous tissue and all the vascular vessels, and I came up with what's called the skull of the shark. Now, it's not really referred to as a skull because its skulls are made of bone. Sharks don't have bone. Sharks have cartilaginous skeletons, so this is referred to as a chondrocranium. But what I want you to see is the way that the jaw of the shark articulates with the chondrocranium. So here we have the shark looking straight at you. You can see its jaw. And this jaw, like I said before, is suspended by musculature. Here we can see the gill arches that support the gills of the shark for respiration, for breathing. The eyes are way out here. The nares or nostrils are way out here. This whole head is covered with that electrosensory ability. You've got this backbone. I cut the backbone right here, but this would travel all the way down to the tail of the shark. Now you'll say, God, that's like bone. But what it is it's highly calcified cartilage. Highly calcified cartilage, not true bone. So I'll leave that here. You're welcome to take a look at that later. This took me about 10 days, by the way. It's not something you just go ahead and do in an afternoon. It's a very tedious process, and it tends to be, it's not necessarily fun, pulling all the muscle and such off of it. But you can see it's a very good learning tool. Tiger sharks. If you asked me 3 years ago whether tiger sharks occur off Martha's Vineyard Island, I'd say yes, but you got to go 40 miles out. Then I got a phone call from a young boy who was fishing for striped bass, and he caught this tiger shark at South Beach, Martha's Vineyard, a very popular swimming beach. So here's one of those lovely exceptions to the rule, where we have this juvenile tiger shark caught right from a beach very close to land on Martha's Vineyard. Typically, tigers occur during very warm summers far offshore. The reason this particular shark, at least in my mind, came in close to shore is because there was a dead whale flopping around in the surf less than a mile away from where this shark was caught, letting out one of these wonderful chum slicks that was swept offshore by tidal currents and was drawing in shark species. And that's a very dangerous situation. That's one of those situations where I would say you do not want to really be swimming in that area. Whale meat is highly attractive to a number of shark species, including the tiger, but also the white shark, which is obviously a dangerous species. I opened this shark up, and it turns out that the stomach was indeed full of whale meat, and the shark was just cruising along the shoreline. Whether this shark would have ever bitten anyone, I don't know. But it was caught, and I had a chance to examine it. If you take a big tiger shark or any other shark and you say, okay, we're going to do a dissection. And for many, many years, that's what we did. We did a lot of dissection work. We learned about sharks by cutting them open. A wonderful scene from Jaws where Hooper reaches in at night and makes this belly cut, and all this milky fluid comes out, and you pull a license plate and a number of other strange things that really don't occur in sharks out. That's really not how it works. You get a team of scientists that slowly and methodically take the shark apart. And a lot of what we know about basic biology in terms of feeding habits, this is the stomach, or the reproductive biology, okay? This is a male shark. And sharks are really one of the few groups of fishes that you could tell males from females without cutting them open. Males have these external organs here which they use for mating. They're called claspers, and they're modified pelvic fins. Pelvic fins are here. Okay, so they have claspers. You can always tell a male from a female shark just by looking at them externally. Scientist on the right studies reproductive biology, so he was interested in looking at whether this male was mature. Individual on the left was looking at gut contents, so he's one of those hardy souls that doesn't mind sticking his hands into the stomach of a shark. And the stomach acids of a shark will actually eat away at your skin. You won't know it right then and there. You're not going to say, my skin is falling off my hands. But you do it enough, and slowly but surely some people's skin is much more sensitive than others. Chuck's skin was not so much as Wes's. Wes always wore gloves because his skin would react and slowly begin to flake off. So you get very, very powerful digestive juices. And this particular shark was very interesting in that when we cut open its stomach, it had turtle parts, it had horseshoe crabs, and it had birds. So what's interesting about the tiger sharks, and again, if you do this to 50 tiger sharks, you get a picture of its diet, is that they're very, 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 they're non-selective, and they'll feed from the surface to the bottom on a number of things. And I had this wonderful image of this poor bird just floating at the surface, and all of a sudden a tiger shark comes up and snatches it. And then the shark swims to the bottom and eats horseshoe crabs, which I can't imagine having much caloric value. Can't talk about New England sharks without, of course, touching on the most famous shark in the world, which of course is the great white shark. Great white sharks are well studied in certain parts, certain hot spots, I call them, the Farallon Islands off California, South Africa, South Australia. I've been fortunate to dive with white sharks off South Australia, put tags in them. We know that they concentrate in these areas to feed on pinnipeds or seals and sea lions. They go to rookeries where they hang out and they love to feast on those. What's interesting about the white shark in New England is it's very rare, and they don't seem to congregate or aggregate or feed at areas where we have high seal abundance, which is very unusual. I don't think I've seen more than 2 white sharks swimming in New England waters. I don't think I've seen more than 2 in 20 years of looking for them. So it's very, very difficult for me to say, wow, I want to be a white shark biologist. I'm going to go out and study them, because I would spend 20 years trying to find one. It's very difficult because they're very, very rare. It's a rare species. And it's rare, which means we don't know a lot about them. We don't know much about it. They're very, very elusive species. So it's hard for us to really know what they're doing, what makes them tick, what they feed on, how long they live. All those questions are really wide open on white sharks in the North Atlantic. That particular animal was harpooned by a fisherman about 20 years ago. This little shark here is one of the smallest great white sharks ever examined by biologists. I call it my not-so-great white shark. It is only about 4.5 feet long, and it's a little bit bigger than what we think they're born, the size they're born at. So they're born somewhere around a meter, a yard long. So that's a pretty big baby for these sharks to have, which means mama's got to be real big. Only we don't know because we've never really examined pregnant white sharks before. But they certainly are capable of getting very big. This is not the same shark. But it is the same biologist who was good enough to pose wearing the same clothes for me. This was a 19-foot, 3,000-pound great white shark. Okay? This also was harpooned off Montauk, New York in the mid-'80s. It's a male. You can see the claspers. So it's a male. We learn a lot from doing a dissection on this shark. But nowadays we couldn't do that because white sharks are what we call prohibited, which kind of means protected. So if you're out fishing and you see a white shark and you want to harpoon it, you couldn't do that without getting arrested. You are not allowed to catch or kill white sharks in the Atlantic anymore, which is great. I think it's wonderful. It also takes away some of our opportunity to study these animals, but I'd rather have a live white shark in the water than a dead one on the dock. Again, they are dangerous animals, but we don't have white shark attacks in New England. At least we haven't in about 60 years. There was a white shark attack in the 40s, right in Buzzards Bay. But we have not seen anything of that nature since. And occasionally we'll have a chance to see white sharks, but like I said, very, very, very rare. And the time it takes from that little guy to get up to be this big guy is an absolute question mark. We just don't know. What I like to do as I finish talking about the great white shark is segue into the basking shark, which is one of my favorite species. Basking shark gets much bigger than the white shark. White shark really doesn't get any bigger than 21 feet. And by far, most of them are 18, 19 feet. Not to say that's a slouch. That's a big animal. A 4,000-pound shark is big. But the basking shark gets well over 25, 30 feet, maybe 35 feet long. Looks similar to the white shark, distant relatives, so somewhat related, but very, very different animals. Very different animals. The teeth of a white shark, I'm sure you've all seen, big, large, triangular teeth that are capable of biting seals in half. But the teeth of a basking shark are this big. This is what the teeth of a basking shark look like. So you have this giant shark, which gets so big, thousands and thousands of pounds, yet it has this tiny little jaw. And that's because it doesn't need it. It doesn't need teeth. Basking shark always wanted to be a whale. It acts like a whale, and it feeds like a whale. Basking shark is planktonic feeder. All right, it's planktivorous, if you will. Basking sharks occur with whales. They feed with whales. They try to blend in with whales. They beach like whales. Most of the basking sharks I've had a chance to examine have all beached. I saw one on Wellfleet last fall. And the basking shark is a bit of an enigma because we don't know much about its biology. Give you an idea of how big the basking shark gets, this is actually a relatively small one, only about 21 feet long. A big fish. I've been in the water with basking sharks, and I didn't know it was a basking shark, so immediately I'm thinking white shark. So you can only swim so fast, and I was relieved to know that wall moving in front of me was actually a basker. The coloration is a little bit different on a basking shark, much more mottled. And this is what a basking shark looks like when it feeds. It opens its mouth, and water pours in over its gills. And the gills have modified filaments on them called gill rakers, which look just like baleen. And they sift tiny little plankton from the water column. And they funnel it down its throat. So these animals thrive and get huge just from feeding on plankton, much like the whales, which of course are very, very, very distant relatives. One of the questions I've been dying to answer, and other researchers have been as well, is where do basking sharks go in the winter? You can go out on a whale watch boat starting next month and see basking sharks straight through October. There's hundreds and thousands of large aggregations of basking sharks mixed in with whales, feeding on Stellwagen Bank or east of Nantucket. But come October, November, where do they go? Where are they in February? So I was able to secure funds to apply a very, very new kind of tag called a pop-up satellite tag. So I jumped in the water with this basking shark, and I tagged, and you can see this tag I put into its back. This tag records information on depth and temperature and light level. And then, at a pre-programmed time by myself, which was February 14th, 2002, and I tagged it in September of 2001, that tag releases from the animal, floats to the surface, and starts chirping to a satellite all the information it's collected. So it's a guaranteed tag recapture with all kinds of information. And what it tells me is what the behavior of the animal was between when I tagged it and when it popped off. And at the expense of boring you with one more figure, I'm going to show you where I tagged it, which was east of Nantucket Island, and where it popped off, which was off of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And what this graph shows you is where the shark spent its time during the day. And it's another depth graph. So what it shows you is that, for the most part, the shark was in the top 25 meters for this period, which was November to early December. And I looked at this for the whole track. It turns out the shark spent some periods of time very, very deep, down to 300 meters, and other periods of time right up at the surface. But what was the most fascinating aspect of that track is that almost all the temperature measurements I got from that shark were somewhere around 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. And well over 72% of those observations were in that very, very discrete range. So this shark preferred a very, very discrete temperature to be in, and I want to say that's 59 degrees or thereabouts. So very, very interesting temperature preference. And so we think now that these sharks move from New England down off to the southeastern United States, but they stay typically deeper where people don't see them. So we're getting some funding to do some more of these tags and to see really what the males do, what the females do, and to get an idea of what the preferred habitat of the species is. As I finish up here, I'm going to get away from New England and dive into two little projects I conducted in the last few years. This one was funded by a film company interested in doing a film on a species of shark that had never been studied before. This shark lives in a very unusual place. It lives on top of the world in the Arctic Circle. What you're looking at here is its primary habitat, frozen solid. We traveled to Baffin Island in the Arctic to study the Greenland shark. And to get to the Greenland shark, we had to bore through 6 feet of ice and get in the water and try to find it. This was our camp setup. And here you can get an idea of our dive site. We set gear to catch these sharks. What's fascinating about these sharks is they get to be about 20 feet long. They're very, very sluggish. The water temperature up there, as you can imagine, is somewhat cold, about 29 to 32 degrees. And they're capable of living in these temperatures. And no one knows how they live or what they typically feed on. This is what a Greenland shark looks like, as photographed underneath the ice. You can't tell because there's no scale in this particular slide, but this shark is about 11 feet long. And I was able to move this shark around. It's extremely sluggish, but it is almost neutral in the neutral density in the water column, so it wasn't particularly heavy. One of the aspects of this photo you can't make out very well is that on the second dorsal fin of this shark, we put transmitters. And we set up listening stations all over this ice. And we let 6 of these sharks go to look at their behavior by recording information from transmitters. Just like the other telemetry I was talking to you about. But instead of following the shark with a boat, which we couldn't do, we set up listening stations. And it turns out that this shark has a very interesting behavior. It doesn't spend all its time on the bottom. It spends time near the surface. And the only thing that lives near the surface really are seals. What's fascinating, again, about this shark is virtually every single one of them has a wonderful little parasite that bores into its eyeball. Here you could see a close-up of that parasite. It's called a copepod. And we sent a bunch of these eyeballs off to a pathologist who did some examination, and it turns out that the corneas of these sharks are severely impaired to the extent where these sharks are rendered virtually blind. So you've got these wonderful little hitchhikers on these sharks. These sharks are up near the surface, and we still hypothesize that they're actually feeding on small seals without probably not using their eyesight, probably using primarily their olfactory capabilities. We published this paper actually this year, and we want to go back and continue to do more research. But this little study, which took about a month, quadrupled the amount of information we'd ever known about this very, very unusual Arctic species of shark. And the film came out a few years ago, and they spent all kinds of money on making the film. It ended up to be a 10-minute segment at the beginning of a pretty good shark film. Now we're going to go to a very, very different setting, and one I kind of prefer to the Arctic Circle. This is the Central Pacific atoll known as Johnston Island. It's one of those wonderful little military bases that not a lot of people know about, but was used a heck of a lot for nuclear testing and all kinds of interesting warfare testing back in the 60s, 50s, 70s, and a number of other exercises were conducted out there. And what's very interesting is that there's a population of gray reef sharks that lives at this little island. This island's only about 1 mile by a half a mile. It's a tiny little island, but it's a military base. And what we did is we did a whole bunch of diving with these sharks, and it turns out that these gray reef sharks congregate into groups every spring. Groups of what we think are females, because it's hard to get a really good handle on what every one of them is. But we think they're largely females, and they form these groups of sharks every year. And And we think they're females that are likely pregnant, but we don't know. We haven't dissected any, we haven't caught any. But one of the things we want to do is see how these sharks interact with each other. So we got together with National Geographic and we used the latest technology which has come out in the last 10 years and that developed by Greg Marshall of National Geographic called the Critter Cam. Has anyone here ever heard of the Critter Cam? It's a fascinating piece of equipment. And really what it is, it's a camera you strap to the back of an animal. And Greg has been fortunate to have put these cameras on a number of different species, not only sharks, but penguins and polar bears and of course the great white shark. This is a critter cam on the back of a gray reef shark. So what we did was we catch these sharks, we put the critter cam on them, and then we'd let them go. And the critter cam would give you a shark's eye view of what that shark was doing, whether it feeding or interacting with other sharks. And then after about 2 hours, a release mechanism would pop. The camera would float to the surface, start beeping, and we'd pick it up. And then you can look at the footage. And we did this to about half a dozen gray reef sharks, and we got some really, really fascinating results, seeing the way these sharks interact with each other, follow each other, and form these aggregations. So it's another tool, high-tech tool, that's come out in recent years and gives us a really interesting visual display of what these sharks are doing in a behavioral sense. So that actually will be part of a film coming up next year as part of a series called Critter Cam Chronicles. But when all is said and done, and I always like to throw this slide in, my office happens to be in the old lobster hatchery building on the vineyard. If you've ever been out there, I know that a couple of people in the room have visited me, and it's great to see visitors, particularly in February. But I have a wonderful view. It's an old building, originally built to raise lobsters. But I've got my office there, and I've showed you all kinds of great photos of sharks and shark field work that I've conducted. But by far, half or 3/4 of my year is actually spent here trying to make some sense out of it so we could put information together that's published and that can be used to help better manage shark populations. So there is a wonderful, fantastic field side, exciting field side to it, but there's also, and I tell this to students all the time, there's also a stick your nose in the computer in the library side to research where you've got to make some sense out of it or people will simply stop paying you. And that's the way it really should be. But that's it for my talk. I'm gonna hang around. I don't know what kind of time we have now. Ooh, I've kind of gone a long time.
I'd let you go.
I appreciate that.
Let's take a few.
Take a couple questions, and then if people want to stick around after, I'm going to hang. Yes, sir.
Basking sharks, do they come inside inshore, would you say, though, by time?
They will. They will.
My friends did snorkel with a rock water. How often would that be?
Hard to predict. They respond to near-shore plankton blooms. And how they find plankton, we have no idea. It's some sensory modality which we haven't figured out. But this is one of the problems with basking sharks. You get a plankton bloom that occurs near shore, south of the Cape in particular, where you get shoaling and sandbars. The sharks get in there to feed, tide goes out, and they're left high and dry, and that's where you get these strandings occurring. It doesn't happen so much north of Boston or on the South Shore, but they do occasionally come close, and we had one year the town of Scituate closed all its waters because a bunch of basking sharks were there. And the best way, of course, to get rid of basking sharks is to invite me to go up there to study them. Because as soon as I got there, hired the boat, brought all my equipment, got all my gear together, they were gone.
So bull sharks? Bull sharks.
Bull sharks. Bull sharks in Massachusetts. Excellent question. Might be referring back to 2001, where a gentleman caught a shark off of Cape Cod. It was on a Sunday. He called the Cape Cod Times. First he pulled out his little book written by a friend of mine, and it's a pretty good book. And he looked at it and said, that's a bull shark. Of course, this was about 2 weeks after the young Arbogast boy had his arm bitten off in Florida by a bull shark. So he called the Cape Cod Times and said, there's bull sharks in Massachusetts. The Cape Cod Times decided not to do any fact-checking and published it. My phone started ringing off the hook. Media went nuts. It was the infamous summer of the shark. I call it the media frenzy, not the shark frenzy. It turns out I even had I had to have DNA testing done on the flesh of this shark just to prove to this guy it was not, in the media, that it was not a bull shark. I mean, I told him it was a sandbar shark, that one species I showed you in the beginning. Bull sharks do not occur in Massachusetts. Bull sharks do not occur north of New Jersey. And I don't even think they occur in any numbers in Jersey, frankly. So yeah, good story. Horrible summer.
I'm just curious, that last island that you were at the military base, was there like a lot of havoc created from the testing, like abnormalities or anything weird like that over the years?
One of the reasons we're there is because the Department of Defense is mandated by law to check to see if there's any kinds of problems created to the environment. Now, I can tell you that there are a lot of problems with the environment because they altered that island from like 64 acres to 640 acres by dredging the coral reef surrounding it to build the island. So it's all physical damage. So if you dive there, you'll find tires and junk and all kinds, those wonderful 55-gallon drums that you'll swim up to and go, that's not a good thing. I wonder if I should be swimming near this. And of course, it's all rusted through. But as far as long-term damage, we don't have any real indication that it has affected populations of fish. We don't see any great incidence of egg or larval abnormalities at all. Levels of various contaminants are relatively low. There are a couple of areas. There's an Agent Orange disposal site, for example, that does show signs of problems. But other than that, it was remarkable that over the last several decades, the island's kind of healed, even though it surely shows scarring and great. You look at this and say, wow, that looks like a parking lot. It used to be a natural atoll island.
Going along with that question, there's been a lot of talk recently about marine mammals and pollution affecting their immune system. Have you seen any relation to the ocean environment and sharks and their immune system, like being affected or chemical buildup or anything like that?
Yeah, that particular question was, have I seen any evidence of contamination or chemical buildup or in the tissue or in sharks, any kind of abnormalities? I will tell you it's not my area of expertise. I don't do that kind of biochemistry. However, I do know people who do that biochemistry. And one of the famous old adages with regard to sharks is there's no evidence that they can get any kind of tumors or cancer growths. And therefore, you can go to the pharmacy now and buy cartilage pills because there was some thinking that sharks have cartilage, sharks don't get cancer, so cartilage must keep people from getting cancer, which is, by the way, absolutely not true. There's no evidence to support that. But now hundreds and thousands of sharks are being killed for cartilage. As far as any increase in incidence of anything like that, I have not read anything to that extent. And in these areas like Johnston Atoll, there's no evidence of it at all.